Hello, my creative friends. It's time to take another art break, and it is summertime, and I live in the land of 10,000 lakes, so water is very much a part of my summertime experience. Plus, it's almost the 4th of July, so I wanted to add just a little dash of Americana in here. I'm going to show you how you can get those reflective looks from the water from the trees behind so easily doing a simple watercolor wash technique in the background. For those of you who'd like to paint along with me, but perhaps drawing's not your thing, I do have a sketchbook membership. That's where I have all of the line drawings for any of the paintings I do on my channel. So it's a simple trace and paint. I do the drawing and then you can trace and paint right along with me. My membership is very reasonably priced. I so appreciate all who have joined and support my channel that way. Well, let's get started. Grab your paint and something cold to drink, maybe iced tea if that's what you like. And let's go ahead and paint this really relaxing summertime lake painting. For this painting, I'm using the Canson XL watercolor paper in 140 pound, and the watercolor paint I'm using today is a Paul Rubin set I have. And before I use my colors, I always like to take a little bit of a misting bottle and get those colors moist in there. That's just going to help with the wear and tear on your brush because the paints are already wet, and it's just a nice way to start with a brighter shade of your color if they're already wet inside of those little cakes of paint. Now for this painting, I'm using a very limited amount of paints. You can see my color swatch off to the left there. I always suggest before you start painting is decide what colors you want to use, because with watercolor, you don't have a lot of grace in changing something once the color is on there. So if you had a blue area and you wanted it to be red afterwards, you can't really do those changes so easily. So it's a great idea to plan out your watercolors you're going to use before you start your painting. For this one, for the sky, I first went ahead and I added water to the sky area, and then now I'm applying my colors. And when you're painting a sky, the darkest color of your sky is going to be at the top of your paper, and then as you move down towards your horizon, your color is going to get lighter. So I added some darker colors at the top, and then now I'm taking a little piece of paper towel and I'm just tapping those cloud shapes in. My favorite paper to use for this is actually toilet paper, but I didn't have any on my table, so I'm just using a tiny bit of paper towel. Sometimes the paper towel has a little bit more texture, so I kind of like using the toilet paper because it doesn't leave any texture at all. But that's just a minor detail. Now that I had the sky done, I'm going to bump down and I'm going to be creating the water. And I'm coming in when I'm doing and painting that water, I'm still moving my brush horizontally across the paper to create that water look. And I'm just moving down on my shapes. I did change my water or the color of my blue just a tiny bit to be different than my sky. So I'm adding a little bit of blue and I'm adding a tiny bit of dirty green in there too. In Minnesota, our lakes do have a slight little tinge of green to it, and it can also have a little tinge of brown. It kind of has to do with your soil or your mud down the bottom of your lake, or depending if you have weeds in there, that would reflect the colors too. So just go off of what maybe your water might be in your area. It could be completely different than what we have here in Minnesota. So I did my water and it's darker in the back there. You can see how my darkest blue is in the back. And then as I was moving forward, my color of my water is getting a little lighter. Now I'm going to be working on that green. I'm okay if a little bit of it blends into my watercolor. I don't want a lot of it there, but I'm going to be adding some reeds of grass and stuff. So it's going to look like the green foliage is going into my water anyway. My darkest shade of green will be in the front of my picture, and then it'll be a little lighter and more diffused as it goes back. I'm adding a darker shadow around the boat, so I chose a color called Payne's Gray. That's going to be the color that I'm using for the shadow areas in my water. And the darker, I just mix my colors. So you can kind of see how I had just a very minimal amount of different colors that I'm using, and I'm just mixing those as I go. So if I have some of it in my palette, I might mix a little bit of it, and that's just going to harmonize my painting. All my colors will be throughout my painting that way. So my water is still a little wet. So now I'm going to work on that very back of the tree line back there. And this is where it's going to help to create some of the reflections. So the paint is still a little wet on my water. I just added a little bit more in the background. Now I'm putting a couple different shades of green in. If you want to leave a few open areas in your green, that's a good idea too, to leave some open areas. But I'm basically going to load up that area. I'm going to have some a little heavier down below. And because that water is still wet in that area too, when I lift my painting up and kind of give it a tap, my colors are going to kind of just gently blend down into that area. And that's how I'm going to create that reflecting look of the trees are reflecting off of the water. Super easy to do, but very effective to get that water reflection type of a look. It's just a very simple watercolor wash technique. I'm going to kind of do the same thing here on the island. I'm going to put my darkest shade of color that there would be some more. In Minnesota, we have a lot of like green grasses and reeds in our water. So I'm going to, not weeds, reeds, well, weeds too, I suppose is what you would call it. But you would definitely have more of a green effect towards like any body of water. You're going to see those types of looks. We do have some sand beaches, but a lot of it is just greenery that's leading up to the beaches. Now I'm just going up and I was adding a little bit more blue to the sky, and I'm coming down now and I'm going to make this a green island. It could be a sandbar as well. We do have some sandbars in our lakes. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of brown here. I'm just mixing my colors here softly. It's just wet on wet technique, so my color is wet underneath and I'm adding the colors on while they're still wet, so the colors are going to just gently blend together. Now those grass areas in the background have had a chance to dry. Watercolor is always going to dry a little lighter, so you're going to let your colors dry and then start adding a little bit more depth to your color by adding more shadows. With watercolor, you're always painting the shadows, so you start out with your lightest colors first and then you move your way darker. So here I'm strengthening my shadows underneath the boats because there would be a stronger shadow underneath there. And look at what a difference that really does make. By adding that extra layer of shadow underneath the boat, it just adds that little extra interest to the simple little painting. Now I thought to add the little bit more Americana feel, since we're celebrating our 250th birthday for the United States over this 4th of July, I wanted to add a little bit of Americana flair. So I did add the flag, but I also wanted to add the blue and the red to the boats as well. So I'm adding a stripe of color there, but on the inside of the boats, I'm just watering down my black a lot to kind of create this very soft shade of blue, or gray. Blue. I was looking at my painting and saw blue and it just came out, the words just came out that way, but I meant to say a light shade of gray to create the shadows on the inside of the boat. I use that same gray for the motors, and I do end up adding colorful seats in each of the boats as well. So the red boat has red seats and the blue boat has blue seats. These are just very tiny bits of colors. I'm using a number 6 round brush in the Princeton line. I do have some links down below of some of the supplies I like to use when using the watercolor. So if you wanted to check them out, there are some links down inside of the description box as well. So you can see I'm adding another layer of green. I'm just picking up whatever I might have inside of my palette. So it could be some of the greenish blue or some of the brown, and just mixing it together and creating all different shades of green without having a lot of different colors that I'm using. And now I'm just flicking in some grass patterns and adding a little bit more depth that way. So I'm choosing a little bit darker green, just using the tip of my brush and just flicking it up and creating those little subtle little strands of grasses and reeds into the water. That's just going to add another depth to your painting by seeing more details forward in the foreground and less details in the back. So the clumps are going to be like in your background. So clumps of like bushes or grasses or trees, those are all clumped together. You don't necessarily see individual ones, but as you move forward on your painting, you're going to see more individual grasses or clumps of grasses together there. So that's where you're going to add your detail, is in the foreground. In the background, it's just more of shadows or suggestions of groupings of trees and bushes. This painting is just about done. I'm going to give it a complete dry before I work on that flag because I want the colors to be very focused in a certain area. So I'm going to dry it and then I'm going to be doing the flag. So with flags, all you basically have to do is just have the colors. So as long as you have the blue for where the star area is and some of the striping, it's going to feel like a flag. You don't have to worry about perspective or getting the right number. Everybody's going to look at that and say, oh, that's a United States flag. I'm going to strengthen the colors a little bit on the boat as well. Going to brighten that blue just a little bit more and some of that red. So I'm going in with a higher concentrated color, so less water, more pigment, and that's going to strengthen those colors a little bit more. I decided to add a little bit more green on that island area. And this is just a great time to look at your painting to see where you might need to add a little bit more contrast. A great way to do that is to squint your eyes when you're looking at your painting to see where you might need a little bit more contrast. You need the darks, the mediums, and the lights. I'm going to go ahead and begin the pen work, and I'm using a micron pen in the nib size 005 in the sepia tone color. I'm kind of really enjoying using the sepia versus a black. It's just a little softer, and I'm enjoying using that really ultra fine tip. I can use it on this Canson watercolor paper, and it works fine. All watercolor paper have different texture. Some is more smoother than others. The Canson is a slightly smoother paper, so I can use that small little nib and have fairly good success. Now, if you're using a paper that has more texture, that small nib size may not work for you. You just want to make sure your paper is dry before you start using your micron pen. Otherwise, it doesn't work so well, and you can ruin your pens if the paper is wet, or ruin your paper too, because it will scratch deeper if your paper is wet. Now this is where I'm going to add all the little scribbly bits, and I decided I wanted to add a little bit more texture in that background. So I'm just really kind of wiggly squiggly in the background with that fine little marker, adding those little textures. Now once I get done with the marker or the sepia tone, I'm going to be using the color pencils. This is where I like to add even a little bit more scribbly bits by using the color pencils, and the Prisma color pencils are one of my favorites to use. I'll have a link inside of the description for those as well, but they work great over watercolor, and especially this like semi-smooth watercolor paper. The color pencil works really great on this texture of watercolor paper. I also like to add just colors that I didn't necessarily use in my watercolor. I like to add those on the top. So you can add different aquas. You could even add a dash of pink, maybe even like in the sky if you wanted to make it more of like a sunset feel to it. You could add a dash of pink and some purple up there. That would be really pretty. I didn't do that on mine. I was mostly focusing on the grass and the hills in the background, and a little bit of interest on the foreground grasses as well. Just add as much as you like to be able to create the interest you like. To create the stars on my flag, I was going to be using the Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. This is a great white to be able to use over top of watercolor because it really is bleed proof. The color of the watercolor will not float to the top of your white, so you'll end up with a very true color of white, and that works great for these stars. I thought I would use this white to create some white gull birds in the sky, but I couldn't really see it in the end, so I did go back and use my micron pen to create those little birds. And these little birds are simple to make. They're just like an M shape is all they are. So if you want to make a bird that looks closer to you, your M shape will be slightly larger, and to get it to look farther away, you just make your M shape a little smaller. Those are very simple shapes to do. I often put like a grouping of 3 or maybe just a single one. So on this painting, I did put a grouping of 3 on the right and just a single one on the left. And that worked great to do it that way. And this painting is just about done. I need to add just a few more little line details, and I'm going to be calling it finished. I wanted to say if you enjoyed watching this painting tutorial, or even if you've painted along with me and you're not a subscriber yet, go ahead and do that. It really does help get my videos out there, and YouTube knows that there's an interest for people who might like to watch a painting video like this, that this might be something that they would want to watch too. Go ahead and hit that bell, and then you'll receive a notification from YouTube every time I put up a new video. Well, let's see what this looks like sitting in my studio amongst some of the other paintings we've created so far this spring and summer. If you're new to my channel and you like doing whimsical style art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. I do put up weekly new tutorials, so there's always something to paint on my channel. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up. It really does help YouTube push my videos out there. Well, thanks for joining me, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll paint right along with me.